Hi again, everybody. Welcome to Panopto's 5 critical questions to ask before you choose a video CMS webinar. All right, let's get started. Welcome to Panopto's 5 critical questions to ask before you choose a video content management system. Here's what we're going to be covering today. In the next 45 minutes, we're going to be walking through a practical 5-question framework that cuts through vendor marketing to help you make a confident platform decision. And this isn't really just theory. It's going to be battle-tested criteria for some really strong professionals that use a lot of video in their organization. And of course, we're going to spend some time answering your questions. And before we dive in, let's introduce our speakers. Katie, do you mind introducing yourself?
Sure. I'm Katie Watkin. I'm from the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania. I am in charge of basically just all the classrooms at Wharton. I tell everyone that if something happens in a classroom or event space at Wharton, my team has something to do with it. So we do all the technology that runs all of our very complicated classrooms.
And Brandon.
Hello, everybody. I'm Brandon Arnson. I work at Cox Enterprises. I'm a senior director over AI, automation, and data, which today means mostly AI, and then all the things that enable that. So we help enable Cox, which is a very large organization that you may or may not know directly, but we do, Cox Communications, which is a large cable company. But if they're not in your market, you may not have heard of them. But then Auto Trader, Kelley Blue Book, Manheim Auctions, lots and lots of things in the automotive space is the Cox Automotive side. And then we also have many other smaller businesses that kind of fit in our portfolio. So we do a lot of different unique things. And I sit at the holding company level providing technology services.
Oh, that's great. And for those of you that have joined us, we have these are two fantastic speakers, tons of expertise and a ton of energy. And before I forget, my name is Scott Nadson. I'm the Vice President of Product Marketing and a former IT director at Syracuse University. I currently teach one class. And I did build a startup SaaS company in the past. So I'm really excited to be here. I'm really excited for our audience. And I know we have a great group of professionals here as the speakers, and of course in the crew and in the crowd that are all implementing and managing a variety of different video solutions. So let's get started. So let's all really start with the reality we're all facing in higher education and in corporate, the corporate world today. In the end, we're all facing, many different things where how do you actually do more with less this year, right? And that's really one of those things. So Katie, does any of this sound familiar in terms of dealing with enrollment pressures, budget cuts, involving student expectations? Again, I know you're dealing with a lot of different technology decisions, a lot of different users, but there's also a lot of different challenges right now. So what are you dealing with there at Wharton?
Sure. I mean, ever since everyone kind of got back to business as usual from the pandemic, we're getting more and more demand for a lot of recording and assets and all these different pieces of how students can learn in different ways. So they're always asking for, can we have recordings of classes? Can we have transcripts? Can we have more information, more ways to get more information from the classes they have? And so we have to provide that, but our budgets didn't increase with that. We have to do more with less. So it's using tools we already had. We've had Panopto for about a dozen years. So we've been learning how to use it more and more and more effective ways. And they keep coming out with new products and new pieces, which really help us kind of meet that demand from the students.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that I remember is I feel like I could never say no when somebody came up to me during the semester, especially like, hey, I want to do this today. And how do I do that? Right. And I think that's what you're talking about. There's just, you have to provide solutions no matter what, in many cases.
Right. And so the students are asking for their content, but the faculty also say, I want to do this exciting thing. How can you help me do it? Or I'm going to do this now. You're going to make it happen for me. So again, we have to come out with, okay, how can we create it? How can we use our tools? How can we compound what we've bought with what we develop in order to really, really bring that level of technology and learning up?
Right, definitely. And obviously in today's business environment, even at Panopto, we're all being asked to do a lot, and sometimes with tighter budgets, and somehow still scaling our operations and preserving critical knowledge, as our experienced team members move on at times and grow. So, the key for us here at Panopto is we're always trying to make strategic technology investments that don't just solve today's problem, but, Brandon, you talked about using AI, but actually can deliver measurable, return on investment today, but also help us for sustainable growth in the future. And, Brandon, talk to me and us about some of the, kind of corporate realities that you're dealing with at Cox.
Yeah, I very much resonate. Obviously, very different world, but resonate with everything Katie said. The requests from our internal customers, our external customers don't get any less challenging or demanding. But we have smaller budgets, we have a hiring freeze, we have fill in the blank. We have much higher bar for getting new technology. The processes just keep adding up with the intention of, it's a good intention. We don't want to just be buying technology willy-nilly that has this big tail on it that we have to, if we have a downturn, we have to figure out how to cancel contracts and waste a bunch of money. So it's understandable, but obviously creates a huge challenge and a lot of work to justify ROI for anything new we're doing. And so, I'm excited to talk about that today of kind of how we did that about 5 years ago. So we're a little newer than Katie is, but it was about 5 years ago, post-pandemic. Like many companies, we had a higher need for asynchronous virtual video content, and I'll talk a little bit about it, as we continue going here. But that was a big ask. We had to make the justification then at a similarly very tight time economically, and with a lot of uncertainty, and we were able to do it, and have been extremely happy with it.
Oh, that's great. It sounds like you're just like many being very, very thoughtful about what you acquire, what you buy, and making sure that you can implement it and manage it long term. So that's great. So let's jump into our first critical question, which may seem very obvious, but it's really where a lot of organizations can get trapped. First of all, how do you ensure your platform can scale without breaking your budget? And I think, that's one of the big things. A lot of these SaaS platforms you're going to buy, anybody is going to buy into, whether higher education or corporations, there could be some sort of usage model. And in the end, like everybody in that room or that Zoom wants these systems to grow and scale. So Katie, how do you ensure, your video learning platform, scales at Penn?
Well, a lot of the times we have to think of what could we use it for and really try to future proof, right? So we're thinking, even though right now what we're doing and what we're trying to meet the needs for, but we also have to think of what the demand could be in the future. A lot of times at Penn, we'll think about just Wharton itself, even though Wharton is one of 12 schools. So if we want to capitalize on scalability and sharing between the schools, we then have to think of, okay, what if we multiply this by the number of students across and the number of faculties across the entire university? What does that look like? And will it just absolutely either kill the platform or kill our budget, right? Because we also have to think of, can the back end of the tool we're using support the usage that we're going to be demanding? So we have to get a really good sense of what this looks like on terms of load and demand.
Do you do tests like that before you acquire
Absolutely.
platforms even, or is it more of like little phase tests, or how does that work?
So yeah, usually what we'll do is we'll have a slate of different products and we'll pit them against each other and we'll do extensive tests, and then we'll put them in real world environments and have test classrooms and have test areas and things like that. And then if we like one or two, we might do a small pilot program for a class and then figure out, we'll work with faculty, we'll work with different constituencies within the university to figure out, does this meet our needs in the small scale? And then we might roll out a little bit at a time. It doesn't really go from, let's pick a product and roll it out to all 30,000 students, right? That's a lot. So we really try to, higher ed is known for working very slowly. So it takes us a long time. I think it took us about a year to get onto, if not more, to get onto Panopto and decide just for the Wharton School. And that was before we recorded every classroom. It was about a quarter to a third of the classes.
Right. Yeah. Those bake-offs are always fun. We always call them competitive bake-offs. That's great. And Brandon, in Cox and in the corporate world, how do you all deal with, once you acquire something and figuring out how well it will scale? How do you all do that there?
Yeah, so similar approach to what Katie talked about, but I think Panopto is actually a really interesting example. So I'll go back. I alluded to this earlier. I'll go back about 5 years when we were making this decision. Had sort of we had a platform before that will not be named, sort of internal-ish, that was not going well. There were some big challenges, including the CEO being personally impacted by those challenges. So naturally, it led to some conversations that kind of rolled down to me to go solve this problem. We need a video platform, and our use case was actually very, very limited. Whereas Katie's talking about, the hundreds of classrooms, even if it's limited to one school, that's still a huge scale. For us, it was big scale, but it was for a twice yearly event. We live streamed that. Previously, it was very in-person focused, with a kind of separate live stream component for folks who are elsewhere in the country for Cox, which is a lot of people, but still it was, mostly focused on in person. To suddenly the pandemic hits, and we need to be able to at scale live stream to tens of thousands of employees all at once. Which again, the previous platform basically fell over when we tried to do that in a bunch of important ways. And so we gathered up requirements, talked to lots of different stakeholders, thought about what the end user experience should look like, looked at tons of options, narrowed it down to three, and did basically the bake-off approach, similar to what Katie talked about with those top three. And Panopto was honestly a pretty easy choice. So we thought about we needed to be able to do this at scale at a very high quality. So it was kind of like, how does it look? And Panopto was like by far the best looking option, just literally from like a quality perspective. We needed great analytics to see who was watching from which locations. Panopto made that very easy. We need to be able to keep it secure. This is confidential information, so it needed to be super easy to uh, tie in our single sign-on system, which it was, which was great, and a bunch of other things that I can talk about more as we go here. But yeah, we then kind of implemented it for that one use case, and it's gone spectacularly well since then. But we now are using it in ways that are much more similar to Katie's use case. So we sort of started to introduce this platform across the company without really thinking about, oh, well, it's a learning management platform, or, learning content management platform. We should be expanding to all these, learning management teams that we have. But they actually started coming to us. They heard about Panopto one way or another, and then would reach out to Panopto and would hear from Panopto, by the way, you guys already have licenses to Panopto. And they were able to start using it. And it didn't cost us anything additional because we already had the licenses and we're using it in a pretty limited way. But Panopto made it extremely easy, and again, literally zero incremental cost to go enable a bunch more people for a bunch of different use cases for a lot more content. Again, which is challenging in its own way, right? Ours was huge scale, but for one piece of content. And then we were able to expand to lots of different pieces of content for a smaller scale, and it worked just as well. And everybody's been, very, very pleased with it. So yeah, that's kind of our story.
Oh, that's great. That's a lot of the kind of words about Panopto, but it's so funny when I think back to some of the career moments. It's usually when technologies fail and very high stakes or high profile moments like that. And I can think of at least a few times, whether it's microphones, software systems, the internet.
Yes.
And
Yes.
those are the things I find to remember, even though I think we've probably all been involved in so many great moments. But yeah, those days when it hits the fan can be very difficult.
Yes.
Yeah, so we don't want to dive too much into this, but how do you deal though, with increases in creation and usage? Like, so a lot of times, like I said, that you get into these phased approaches, but quickly, what happens when there is a huge demand, let's say, for various reasons? What do you do?
So one of the things, this actually happened at Penn, where initially when we started using Panopto, because it was such a focused and small area of Penn, it was just Wharton, it was just a few classrooms, we had a model with Panopto where we would just pay as we went for storage. So we had to be very conservative about what we recorded and where we were storing it and really consider that. But as we grew, we were able to negotiate with Panopto and work like we usually do with our vendors to try to resize our purchase. And now we're on a unlimited, basically unlimited storage so that we don't have to be as careful now because we renegotiated, because we saw what was coming and then worked with our vendors to figure out how to get there. So a lot of times it's trying to work with our suppliers, work with vendors to figure out, okay, if this met our need now, can we meet our need in the future? Can we meet our need, or did it work in the past? How can we make sure it works in the future? And if it can't, then you have to kind of regroup and think about it again. It's that future proofing. It's how do we make sure we're sustainable, because semesters are going to keep coming, classes are going to keep coming. There's no stopping it. So how do you meet that need going forward?
Yeah, I found I think especially whether it's just in higher education, but I know anytime we dealt with limits, that could be challenging, like the old cell phone plans where you're almost de-incentivizing usage, or at least it's a
Mhm.
psychologically, you're just
Right.
thinking about, I can't use this, actually, I got a ration. And like those types of models can be really challenging in high video usage environments. So that's one really good call out there, is this whole idea that make sure you have a model that you're not really counting minutes, counting bytes and bits and things like that, because you do get into this rationing mentality, which can be difficult to deal with. So Brandon, anything to add?
Not really, other than it's kind of funny to hear Katie talk about that. Like we have literally never had to think about this because I think we came in after it was purely license based and it
Mm-hmm.
was SaaS and there was no servers to spin up or whatever else. And so we were able to just start using it. And as we scaled up, we never had questions about can it handle the extra storage
Mm-hmm.
or bandwidth. Our concerns had mostly been about can we have 20,000 people join the same webcast at the same time and not have it fall
Right.
over. And we've had no problems. So kind of on both sides, we've been fine, as I was talking about before. So
No,
yeah.
that's great. And yeah, and I think that's one important thing to distinguish here. In Katie's case, and a lot of our customers in higher education, there's a lot of scheduled recordings of an hour lecture or a 50-minute lecture, right? And then that is going to be put in some sort of repository in Panopto and used on demand, usually viewed through a learning management system, which has its own challenges, right? It's all these concurrent recordings. It's making sure you're storing it. And that's happening every single day, 5 days a week, for 9 months out of the year, right? There's a lot of scale there. There's a lot of moving parts there. There's a lot of viewing and things that have to happen, right? Keeping the lights on there. And then in Brandon's case, you have one of the unique challenges, Brandon, of live concurrent usage. So we've all watched the Olympics online, or maybe the Super Bowl or something online,
Mhm.
and live streaming is tricky. There are a lot of companies that make it look good online and it works, but there are many times where there's jitters and there's wonkiness online. So yeah, what
Yeah.
Brandon, you're talking about, 20,000 users concurrently working is not easy, and those are real corporate challenges. So that's great that you each are sharing kind of your lived experience in your organization. So as we move on to the second question, which addresses something different. We were talking about scale and creation, but in higher education, there's quite a bit of experienced staff members, right? And there's experienced faculty members, and there is a lot of institutional memory. And I love going up to Syracuse University and engaging with all these PhDs and experienced professionals and faculty practitioners. And I always think there's so much interesting knowledge and there's so many interesting conversations going on. And Panopto captures a lot of those, which is great. But sometimes these professionals retire, faculty members retire, uh, guest speakers come on to campus and they disappear for the next 5 years. So like you need to preserve that knowledge, right? And video platforms like Panopto and others can be a great solution for that. So what types of knowledge are you preserving, and how are you preserving knowledge at work? Because that becomes one big issue, in the video content management space in education.
Yeah, I mean, the faculty live and die by their content. A lot of the presentations, a lot of the lectures that they're doing is also based on their research. So we have their research that's feeding into teaching, teaching that's feeding into research. So it's their IP that we have to make sure is protected and also kept for institutional knowledge. So we're very concerned always with permissioning and expiring and making sure it's available when needed and not available to people who may use it in a way we don't want them to. So we do use Panopto and with an LMS, we use Canvas, and it's that link so that we can have all of the classes being linked together with their lectures and any media. We use Panopto as a storage as well. So even if it's not captured by Panopto, we store everything there. It's all in one place. It works really well so that we can keep track of this stuff. We can keep track of where this IP is going. We also use it as a way to check ourselves in the past to make sure we're better in the future so that we review it, we share for teaching, to increase the teaching capabilities of people for learning, the meta learning of teaching, not just what they're the content.
Yeah, definitely. And absolutely. What about you, Brandon? How are you preserving institutional knowledge at Cox?
Yeah, so we have, very different use cases, right, for the types of training we're doing. So a lot of what we have ended up using it for, again, we have the large webcast use case, which has actually expanded to lots of other large webcasts as well, beyond just the one I talked about right away. But the biggest, kind of growth has been in individual learning teams, providing this to their frontline workers. So similar to Katie, we have a separate LMS. And then this content gets linked to them. And then some teams have use cases where they come directly to Panopto as well. So it's a mix, just team by team, how they want to use it. I mean, essential content, right? So this is like frontline workers safety. This is our techs that are going out and installing our internet and cable to customers to make sure that they know step by step what to do, or if they run into issues, or if they need to get initial training, right? Like these blue collar jobs are often very high turnover. And so having this content out there and readily available is, essential, right? And so that is obviously one of the critical parts of having all of this right there and easy. And then what's really cool and it kind of has evolved over time is, these videos create automatic transcripts, or they can, right? And so we've actually then pulled some of those transcripts into LLMs to create like a bot that folks can use. So the video content is still really valuable, but like
Awesome.
the fact that this content exists now means it can be used in different ways. And so, just generating content, whatever it is super valuable, especially in an age of AI, increasingly in an age of AI. And so it kind of makes it a unique experience of having this evolve beyond just Panopto, but again, with Panopto being sort of at the center of all of it.
That's great. I'm glad you all mentioned AI, but I always think this is a great discussion on the power and value of human intelligence, and I think systems like Panopto can really use it. And I love that you're throwing it into AI and blending it and creating some sort of hybrid solution. But I know, again, going back to Syracuse, I mean, it's one of the best things at Syracuse University is getting thrown into all that human intelligence, right? And being able to access it just like it's a library that we all went to is really important. And Panopto can enable that. So that's fantastic. So yeah, so let's talk about when we get into knowledge preservation. I know you kind of hit on some of these. We don't spend too much time, but our audience, like what specific features should they look for and turn to their video platform for when they talk about, accessing knowledge and searching knowledge and all that stuff? What are the things that that takes like a passive video experience to another level, right? It's not just about staring at a screen. There's much more that Panopto and other platforms can offer. So, what are you doing in terms of with Panopto, some of the extra features, or I call it sprinkles on the ice cream, Katie?
Yeah, so very similar to what Brandon was talking about, but because we're Wharton, we branded it. We have a tool that we call Lecture Recall, which is we took the transcripts from Panopto for a whole class, fed it into, here's a diagram of how all the behind the scenes works technically. We took all of the information, all of the transcripts of a single class, of every single lecture within that class, gave it to AI, and then created an interface so students could actually ask a question about a topic, and it would say, oh yeah, lecture 4, lecture 5, lecture 17, right? It would be able to, and give links to exactly where in the
Mm.
recordings that content was. So it's a way for students, instead of trying to search through or remember or go to the syllabus, they can actually just ask the bot, hey, I remember, wasn't there something about real estate that we talked about, even though this is a finance class? And say, yeah, that was in lecture 4, right? So it was a very cool way to think about how do we use all of the data that's being shared by a faculty member so that you can review it, right? And looking at, when you look at a tool like this, it's exactly what you said, Scott. It's about looking at not just the video itself, but all the assets that come with it. And how do you get them out, right? We leverage the APIs, we leverage LTIs, we leverage all these different things so that we can take the raw content and what can we do with it from there.
Yeah, this is great. And the first time I saw this, I got really excited. I'm always excited to hear about it. It's one of my favorite things of being in the industry is seeing really intelligent, bright teams and people, build new solutions with on top of platforms. So this is really great. And Brandon, in your space, again, you're not in higher education, but you're doing a lot of training. You're doing a lot of geographic delivery, and you have to share a lot of information to a lot of different folks, as you mentioned. So what are some of the features and functionality that are really important in your organization, in your world?
Yeah, I think just ease of management. I mean, I think we haven't talked too much about it, but like it is very, very, very easy to manage videos within Panopto, to archive older videos, set up auto archiving. Like I know that's essential for a lot of the teams that I chat with about how they're using this to make sure that it's the most up to date, like safety or compliance information that folks have access to, and that makes it easy. I think the other thing is that integration with our learning management system, very easy, and that obviously is extremely helpful. And then the last I say is, again, I don't have a cool diagram like Katie did, and that is actually a cool diagram. I love that. But again, we've done a very similar model for a couple of different use cases where like we have like an overall at one of our divisions, like an overall chatbot that they've had for a long time, but now that it's integrated with generative AI, they were able to pull in the transcripts. So a frontline worker can go ask questions about basically any topic that's covered in a Panopto video. And because Panopto makes that easy, that the content is right there. Now, pushing it back into Panopto, like they're doing at Wharton, is a really cool idea that I might, dig into a little bit. So, but either way, like the functionality, like whenever we've had like a problem we're trying to solve, it has been pretty straightforward to go solve it with Panopto, which is helpful because it's just very customizable for what we need.
Well, again, I love that it's all the human, intelligence that's really being fed into the AI system. So you're talking about captions and transcripts, and like that becomes this like powerful, elixir where it's just so much important data, and you can throw it into other systems and let those systems do what they're good at. So yeah, I love that we're talking about that, and I think that's really something that we can keep building on over time. So that's great. So let's get into our third question. We're right on time here. And let's get into some operational efficiency. So we always want to be efficient. Again, getting into some of the budget constraints. Sometimes we're not always getting an army of people every year or semester or new fiscal year. And you got to find systems out there that can help you reduce administrative workload while you improve some of your outcomes. So in Brandon's case, he's going to be doing training outcomes, and in Katie's case, we want to make sure the students are actually learning more, right, and having quality learning experience. And sometimes it's really difficult, but there are a lot of platforms that can make it achievable. And I know this is a little bit more relevant to Cox enterprises in terms of making sure, that you're really being efficient when you're delivering training content, and you're also making sure you're improving the outcomes, because you have to watch the videos to have your job there and to be, is that correct? In some cases.
No, exactly right. In many cases, that's right. And again, it's kind of funny that initial use case of the large webcast, we wanted to be able to see who was watching, to combine that with some HR data to then see like what location they were watching from. Like we weren't tracking like who was watching the big webcast. We were combining that with data, again, to figure out where they were watching from. Were they a manager or an individual contributor? Just sort of things that leadership was interested in knowing. Well, what's nice is, again, that same functionality can be used for actually tracking who watched a video. And so that data is, again, extremely easy to pull, pretty easy to automate the pulling of that info, and then compare it with, HR data to get the information you need beyond just their email. But like we can use that as the primary key, so it's very straightforward. And so, yeah, it's been surprising how like a requirement we had over here has been extremely useful for not even thinking about it as a requirement. It's just like a team asks, "Hey, can we do this?" And the answer is yes, we can. It's very straightforward. We've already done it for this other reason, so here you go. So yeah, I think that's a great one to point to as like a very straightforward way to use some functionality in a really powerful way.
Excellent. And so if you think about some efficiency and automation, I think there's lots of different, types of features that can make a big difference on day-to-day operations. And a lot of times that, they're really not nice to have. Like a lot of these tools and features that separate platforms from the kind of, need to have versus nice to haves are really exquisite, elegant, simple, features, and a lot of automation again to support efficiency. And how is automation and efficiency important at Wharton in your technology services and in IT space and ed tech space?
Absolutely. I mean, we're dealing in scale, so we have to be able, it's the efficiency we're looking at is how do you do a lot of things all at the same time in a very quick way, because, there's only so many people who can do this sort of thing on our staffs. So we actually use a lot of different automation individually to string together a lot of programs, because also Wharton has been around since 1881. The University of Pennsylvania has been around since 1740. I mean, it is a very old institution, so it's been, before computers. So we've been organically growing a lot of the different things that we do. So you're stringing together different types of systems that were used for different things in different times. So we have a scheduling system that may not easily talk to our recording system, which may not easily talk to our storage system, which may not easily talk to our LMS. Luckily, we have systems put in place, and that we use the Panopto uploader in order to, we create an XML file out of our scheduling tool that then we upload using the Panopto uploader that then gets to all of our remote controllers that then puts the schedule on so that we can record every single class when they need to be recorded. And then that zooms its way over to the storage in the different folders for each class within Panopto. And then we use the LTI over to Canvas to be able to access all those classes. And then we use some homegrown tools in order to regulate who can access that and when. So it's those are like 6 different systems all strung together. But the key there is being able to automate the individual pieces so that we don't have to take the file and move it place to place, right? Most of that stuff, we're just downloading the XML, uploading it once, and then it's good to go, right? We don't have to worry about everything else. So that's the kind of efficiency that we're looking for. And we're always trying to improve on that. That's been a process that's been developed over years and years.
That's great. And I know that when I first met Katie, there was a lot of that auto magic stuff happening. So that's fantastic. I love learning about that stuff, and like to see it all happen. And Brandon, I know you mentioned when we first talked, that user permissions, access management is ever critical at Cox. So maybe talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah. So Panopto has a feature where basically you can grab an attribute from your kind of SSO file that, to keep it simple, that basically passes over. And so we grabbed like our department name and like concatenated with another piece to keep it so that it's not 1,000 items, it's 100 items or 100 individual ones. And what it does is it then creates groups automatically, which is a very cool automation. And then it puts people in those groups based on that attribute. So pretty straightforward, but incredibly powerful to avoid having to manually go through and assign 30,000, 50,000 employees into groups. And I'll just add also that from like a single sign-on perspective, what's extremely helpful is we also don't have to like pre-provision users or anything. All we had to do was connect people to our SSO, and if they were able to successfully SSO, they automatically got provisioned or get provisioned within Panopto, and that's just how it worked from the very first day we started using it. So we didn't have to do anything fancy to make that happen. So again, incredibly easy. And then as soon as they get there, if you automatically drop them in a group based on that, and then assign specific content to specific groups, basically all they need to do is log in, and you as the admin don't need to do anything. They just only have access to certain things by default at that point. We're also actually currently working on integrating it with our SailPoint system, which is like our access management kind of internally that we are planning to use to kind of make that even more powerful, sort of outside of Panopto. But either way, just the fact that that's possible and was pretty straightforward and easy for us. It's just a setting you set up to point to within the admin portal, and it's been incredibly helpful for us. So that's been great.
That's great. A couple of great examples of simple and elegant solutions. So that's always the goal there. So that's great. And we're going to move on to question 4. And this is what I would say is, sometimes we have bought tools or technologies or maybe vehicles in the past where it's kind of like we just bought, the technology graveyard, and, you got into something that never evolved and adapted. So how do you, really make sure you're choosing platforms that will evolve with you rather than becoming obsolete in 2 to 3 years, and then forcing you all to go through that really painful process of RFP or bidding or just reevaluating and understanding our needs. So talk to us a little bit about how you identify and understand how future ready some of these platforms that you invest in, like Panopto. Katie or Brandon?
Hey, do you want to go first?
I can. I want to give you a chance to go first because I keep jumping in.
That's okay. You got it.
A lot of these times we have to kind of figure out where the faculty want to go. So we're trying to chase after what they want to do. So we have to know what the markets are doing, what's out in the zeitgeist. So we're looking at the roadmaps, we're looking at where the vendors are going and then where the faculty are going so that we can also be ready to meet those needs. And so we're always looking at the horizon. We're looking out. We're also looking at what are the newest techniques in order to use what we already have, plus what's coming out to be able to apply the techniques we know now to what's coming out in the future, right? So it's a catch-up game that we're constantly playing, which is just technology in a nutshell, honestly.
Definitely. What about you, Brandon?
Yeah, so I won't even speak specifically to Panopto here, but just as someone who's been looking a lot at software, especially AI software
Mhm.
recently, I think what matters for me is like how well are they integrating, you know, future looking technology. And again, AI is the example to use right now because that's the only thing any SaaS company is talking about, rightfully so, because again, it's unlocking all sorts of powerful features. But are they just saying AI to say AI, so
Right.
that they hope you will get tricked into buying them, or is it, being integrated in a meaningful way? So, like an example from some software that we have looked at recently at Cox. So we have a legal team that wants to be able to use AI to like help them write legal briefs and review things and whatever. And there's some software, I won't mention the name, but basically that uh, says it can do this. And when we looked into it, it was true. It actually had really cool grounding in like legal databases, and it would make sure that it didn't hallucinate. Because I'm sure you guys have heard the stories of the lawyers who walk in front of a judge with a brief that has four cases that don't exist because AI made them up, right? And so that's an example of we looked at that and said that is actually worth that money to go buy, because they are providing something that we could not build that ourselves very easily, at least. Like, we'd
Right.
have to go buy that database and, get access to that database and do a bunch of work. So they've done real work. And I would say actually even 5 years ago, when we looked at Panopto, the ability to search was like the thing that Panopto talked about a lot, and it actually was pretty mind-blowing. And this was 5 years ago, pre-generative AI, where you could
Mhm.
search for basically anything within any transcripts anywhere in the platform, and it would find it. And obviously, that has only expanded since then. So again, I think of Panopto as like, again, not trying to show for it, but like I was blown away by that 5 years ago, and now it has AI integrated, and it is actually kind of mind-blowing the degree to which it can find. If you've ever used, certain products that shall not be named, but that maybe provide email, and even if you put in exactly what was in an email and it somehow can't find that email, you just want to like throw your computer. But not just kind of the opposite of that. Like you're kind of like, I think it was about this, and somehow it finds the video you're looking for, has been my experience. And again, that was like pre-generative AI, and it's improved a lot since then. So yeah.
Yeah, it's funny those things we expect to be kind of just work perfectly like electricity. Like search should be pretty straightforward,
Yeah.
right? So I agree with you.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think what you guys are mentioning too about evaluating, like, are they just throwing AI in the recipe just to throw AI in the recipe, but or is there really a purpose, and is that flavor
Yeah.
being added the right way? Is it omnipresent AI and just becoming like and really helping with jobs to be done and not just doing it for glitzes and glamours? Or I would say just putting an ornament on a tree, like that can be taken off. Like, is it really part of the product and the solution? Does it help you
Yep.
get your jobs done? So that's really, really important. And I guess we would probably call that like future proofing. Like in many ways, we want to future proof it. We do not want to create more work for ourselves in the future. And I think a lot of times, there's probably all kinds of different rubrics or checklists that you all have, evaluated or utilized. And we created a very bare bones, simple checklist to think about. But I know personally, to give Katie and Brandon a break here for a second, they talked about AI and search, which is huge. But I think that whole integration ecosystem is incredibly important, right? That we are all investing in different tech stacks at different levels with different pricing models. And I think one of the most complicated things is making sure that all those tools are actually talking to each other in the same language. And there's minimal updating needed for those integrations where you can really flip that light switch, and it does just work, like Katie was talking about, is kind of getting each of those 6 integrations together. And then once you turn it on, it does just work. So I think, here, I guess Katie and Brandon, both have very different environments that you work in, different types of use cases, users, technologies. Like, what's on your future proofing checklist? Let's start with Brandon this time. The surprising.
Hey, there you go.
Yeah.
For me, it really is all about like, can you do the basics well? Because that tells me that you're going to be able to build for the future as well. So again, like vendors that we trust, is always what we look for. And can you show that your current, that what you actually have built, can you demo it to me like in real life, where it's not just a flashy demo that works
Mhm.
in that one situation that you set up? But like we like to be like, hey, we need to be hands-on for 2 weeks, otherwise we're not even gonna play around with it, and
Mhm.
it better do what we want it to do today. Because there's, being on the roadmap is the classic thing of SaaS tools, and we have been burned by that before. So we are really big on you need to already at least have a version of what you say you're going to have today, for us to trust you that you are actually going to build the thing that you say you're going to build in the future. So I guess the way to future proof, I guess, Scott, to be as like concise as I can, is like we try not to buy for the future. We try to buy for today, and if you can meet all our requirements today, that probably means you've done a good job of building future proofed features, right?
Makes sense. Makes sense. And, Katie, just because I've spent a lot of time in higher education, you have some, really interesting, probably use cases, users, the faculty members in different departments like accounting to supply chain to like marketing and sales, all have different wants and needs. They're all different species. So how do you future proof at Wharton and, at University of Pennsylvania with lots of different users and different wants and needs and goals?
Well, sometimes we have to balance between what are the edge cases, who's really on the bleeding edge of technology, and what are the masses looking at. So we're constantly having a dialogue with our faculty, with the students. We're trying to learn where they're going in order for us to really know how to provide that for them. One of the things we really look at is if a product doesn't do it, we'll build it ourselves and then integrate it ourselves. So we'll look at a product and say, have you integrated what we thought you should have done 4 years ago now? Right? Or did you do it and did you do it better than us? And that's kind of a good indicator that we're going in the same direction with the tool. Luckily, Panopto's really done that for us, where we've done other tools and then we're like, oh, we don't need that anymore. They're doing it already, which is really fortunate. It doesn't always happen. But when it does, it's just so great because we know, oh, that means their forecast is probably going to mirror ours too. So it's a really good indicator that we're a good match product vendor and school wise. But it's, trying to just, a lot of times we guess and get it wrong, which you have to take some risks here when you're trying to future proof. You want to be in the moment and meet that need. And sometimes you think everybody's going to be flying cars and, we're not yet. So you kind of have to, the risk is kind of built in.
Absolutely. No, that's great. I appreciate that perspective. And we're getting to our final question, which is great. And if you really think about this, I don't think any of us probably have the luxury just to make these decisions in a silo on our own. So the fifth and final question addresses the people side of this platform selection, right? The community around us and the stakeholders around us. How do each of you get buy-in across departments with all these different needs and priorities? Brandon, you have your own needs and priorities. You're very technical. You have a lot of solutions and systems that you got to get embedded into human lives at Cox, and Katie, the same thing. So in terms of getting buy-in, getting consensus about your stakeholders, and sometimes things take longer than the vendors always want. But how do you do that, Katie? We're going to start with you. How are you getting buy-in and consensus across all your stakeholders at Wharton?
Sure. A lot of times we do it the way people have been asking for it, we deliver it for them, right? So if we have a track record of doing that, we have that built-in trust so that when they have asked for it, we provided it. It's already there. They have faith in the product. But a lot of times when it's very new, I love using the evangelist method where we'll find one or two really, really enthusiastic and really dedicated people to a certain product, and they will do the advertising for us. So we get that contact of they're so happy with it. They tell their friends, and it builds in this sense of, oh, this is a really cool thing. They're doing some really cool things. So combining our relationships individually as well as their relationships with each other is really the way that we can help spread the good word about whatever we're trying to bring in and replace things with or make change, because not everybody likes change, but when it's so good, you kind of can't ignore it. You can get excited about it.
Yeah, I like that. And so there's influencers at Wharton is what I'm hearing. You have some influencers.
A little bit, yeah.
You said evangelists, but it sounds like influencers to me.
That's the current term because I swear.
Brandon, what about you? How do you get buy-in from across your organization? Sometimes it might be people you probably even you work with daily. You have to get buy-in geographically. How do you do that?
Yeah, I think two things. It's being extremely clear about why you're doing it, and so detailed requirements, really understanding what you're buying and why. I think it's very easy for people to fall in love with a tool without and being, because it solves one thing, but also it has all these other features that you're buying that you don't actually need, you haven't actually made the case for. So we try to start wherever we can with the business case. And really tie that to what would the ROI look like. Again, talking about because it's top of mind for me right now, evaluating AI tools. There's lots of AI tools that are basically just like a wrapper in front of what we already have in-house with like, Microsoft Copilot or whatever, right?
Mhm.
We don't need it. And so even though it's a shiny tool that does something cool for you, a lot of times the thing we try to do is say, can you already achieve this with an existing platform? Which actually is interesting for Panopto, because again, that's exactly what happened. We sort of had an existing platform. We had other teams trying to solve problems. And it was like, by the way, we have an existing platform that can do it for you. The second thing I'll say is, when we were going through the assessment for Panopto, and I've used this model, dozens of times since as we think about software, it's like get people hands-on. Again, I mentioned before, we don't want to look at your roadmap. We want to use your tool and show that it can do what you say it does. And in our case, we did the bake-off between three different tools, but we got like 100 stakeholders involved in that bake-off. We wanted as many people involved as we could. One, to kind of, really pressure test the platform, but two, to get a lot of people, building that consensus around what is the right tool? Is this the one? Again, in this case of the Panopto selection, it was like everyone was blown away by the quality and the ease of use and everything else. But like there's plenty of times where you learn so much beyond just I like this one the best around what you actually want and what's going to work best. So again, I think building that consensus, involving lots of people in the process and being very clear about what you want.
Yeah, no, that's great. I love that you just want, I want to use it. I want to do it. I mean, people don't know this. I also spend a lot of time selling, and I always say like selling vaporware never works because all you
Yeah.
do is you let people down, and people get very disappointed with you as a seller and as the company, right? There's no one wins by selling vaporware. You win very short time in a meeting. After
Yeah.
that, you just really disappoint people. So yeah, that's really great. I mean, live action, use it, and learn by doing is really really important. So it sounds like, you each have developed, a significant amount of strategies to really build consensus while it's getting, all your use cases together, making sure you're demonstrating value to that group. Obviously, the evangelist, influencer, and pilot programs are really, really important to make sure that it really does work for the people that are going to use it daily and depend on it daily. And of course, there's always the one challenging thing, after you launch something, and whether it's vendors or organizational leaders like yourselves, is okay, how are we going to train and enable people and support people after we
Yeah.
roll this out, which is really, really important. So, I think that's where you get into really thinking about our 5 questions, talking about all these different issues that we've been talking about, is you really start to have to really think about how do you evaluate that total cost of ownership. And a lot of times organizations can dramatically underestimate this if they're rookies. Luckily, we do not have rookies on the call. We have people that really understand what happens when they invest in these platforms. So Katie, like talking about like just calculating the cost of ownership or other lessons, when you're really thinking about buying into something, what comes to the top of your mind when you think about cost of ownership and the costs that come along with doing all this work that you do?
Yeah, I mean, there's the upfront cost of the literal cost, right? There's the upfront cost of setting it up initially and then ongoing maintenance and support. But it's also the will people go back and do the kind of care and feeding that isn't strictly maintenance, but like the combing through users, learning more, doing more with the tool, right? That's also a cost. If you buy a tool that just has a ton of different things you can do and use a fraction of it, that's so much waste there. Right. So you want to make sure that the tools you're buying are the right size and the right fit for the usage that you want to do. And you have people being able to take advantage of that too.
Right. And then we also want to make sure we're preventing like the wrong choice too. I mean, which means is untangling, especially I remember proposing that we switch our learning management system at the Syracuse University once. And I remember that I almost was ran out of that room, right? Because, you're sitting there and you're thinking about, like, what if we do that, Scott, and it's the wrong choice? And that would be a massive mistake for time, effort, all the learning and training that would go involved, making sure all the files are migrated. So there's a lot of challenges also with making the wrong cost, which also pops up. So yeah, thank you, Katie. And then Brandon, in terms of how you look at like total cost of ownership, high level, share that with us.
Yeah, so yeah, I think Katie summed it up pretty well, but I think calling out like implementation and training expenses, like a lot of times when we look at software, especially more legacy software, like what the ongoing yearly cost was almost didn't matter at all because it was so expensive to maintain and to set up, right? You had to pay like some implementation partner to come in for, 10x what the actual like initial cost was because it's so complex to set up. Like I think with Panopto, it was $0 for us. Obviously, we were not directly migrating from one platform to the next, but what we set up for the POC, like the bake off, which was very easy, was just we just turned that on for production. It just worked, which was very nice. And that is very rare. And obviously, there's always, if you're switching from one platform to another in a way where you have to migrate a lot of data, that's obviously a lot more challenging. We did not have to do that. We sort of started this platform and then we built on top of it. So switching to a different one would obviously be a different story. But that's always what I'm thinking about is like, what does that complexity look like? Have you really planned for it? And then training, I think, is a great example too. Like, if it's not very intuitive, you are going to have so many challenges, and you're going to have like a user guide for everything. And we have a few user guides for Panopto, but for the most part, it has been very simple to just say like, okay, now go use it. And then from an admin perspective, I sort of have delegated admin responsibilities to individual groups who use it. And because of the controls that are in place, I can basically just say, here's kind of the way I think about it. Go do it how you want to do it. And that again has worked pretty well for this platform.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned the word migration because that's one thing that's not on this slide. I was just thinking about it because there might be some folks in the audience here who are on a current platform, whether it's Panopto and they want to migrate off, or another platform where they want to migrate to Panopto. And I always think about that migration cost, and people, I've seen their eyes go, "Oh my gosh, like it costs that much to move all this content over here." But my natural question next is like, how much would it cost you to remake all that content? You know what I mean? And you think about how much time do those faculty members spend in their lives and effort to make that content, you know what I mean? So like it's migrations are a really big piece of this as well. So yeah, when you start thinking about, the return on investment in your organizations, whether it's higher education or corporations, you really just need to think about understanding like the real efficiency gains that we talked about here. How much time savings will there be? Obviously, if we're using software, generally that's one of the most simple things that you do get back. Hopefully you are saving yourself some time in manual labor. Are you able, Brandon, I know you mentioned analytics, and obviously in higher education, grades and analytics are critical. So, are the metrics available? How can you use those metrics, and do they apply to, things that you need to do or jobs to be done at work? And then, is there real value in your organization? So as we wind down, before I say thank you, I want to pause. We do have a couple questions. And we have a really easy one for you, Katie, and this will be interesting. I think I might know the answer, but a great tool was brought up. Katie, do you all use Camtasia for lecture capture at Wharton?
Not as a school. We have a lot of people that do a lot of different things across the university. So there are pockets that are Camtasia diehards who've been using it for years. We don't, as a school, we have other tools that we use. But I know it is an exceptionally good tool for a lot of different things. We just don't need it for specifically that purpose yet. But we're always looking to integrate things. So it's always on the cusp of, oh, can we use Camtasia for this? And it's maybe not yet. And so maybe one day.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a big Camtasia fan. I've probably been using it since I think about 2000, earlier than 2005. So I would say when they ask that question, it's probably not for lecture capture, but for video snack creation,
Yep.
interactive trainings, like small little modules. I think Camtasia Studio is great. Obviously, screen recordings and all the animations.
Mhm.
And you do not need to be a professional video editor. So probably not the best long form lecture capture tool for scheduling and scalability, but absolutely a great tool. So good call out there, Ken. And we do have another question. Can we get all 5 questions on a single slide? Not in this live webinar, but we could do it after. So I apologize, Raul. I'm not going to be able to do that, but we are going to wind down here. We're running out of time. And I appreciate, first of all, our audience joining us for this webinar, and especially appreciate Katie and Brandon sharing all of your expertise. Thank you all so much for joining us today, engaging with this framework. We definitely are happy to take more questions offline. You have our contact information here. Again, I think you've been introduced to 2 fantastic professionals in the video learning space, one in higher education and corporations. And I think one thing to think about, choosing a video content management system isn't just a technology decision at this point. It's really a strategic investment, based on where you're going in the future of your organization. So thank you so much again for joining our webinar. If you're interested in signing up for a demo, you can scan the QR code here. But Katie, Katie, thank you so much. And Brandon, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having
Thanks,
me.
Scott. Thanks for having us.
Thanks, everybody.
Everybody should have a great day and have a great weekend, everyone.